my memory of her was I couldn't see her from the first part of the stoop, but it looked like she was stooping almost at something else. She was coming down vertically at a distance, and then she bottomed out the stoop and shot past me over my left shoulder at God knows what speed, and just connected to the rooster before he hit the reeds by the edge of this reservoir. And it was just, that was the flight of her career for me.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Told podcast, and what is now the 13th episode in our series featuring Falconers from the UK. And as usual, I have to start off by giving a quick shout out to the two Falconers from the UK that made this series possible, being Neil Davies and Simon Tyers. And of course, Neil is the editor for Pursuit Falconry and Conservation magazine. As you've heard me promote this magazine before, I highly recommend that you get a subscription. There's always lots of great new falconry content in each new issue. If you want to check it out and don't know anything about it yet and want to subscribe, head to pursuitfalconry.co.uk. It's well worth the expense, and I'm sure you'll enjoy each and every new issue that comes out. And of course, I also have to mention Simon Tyers, who is also the author of The Specialist Falcon. If you haven't added this book to your falconry library yet, I highly recommend you do so. There's a lot of great information about flying long wings in this book, and there's also a lot of information as far as droning and some of the other newer technologies in falconry that are used in more modern-day applications. So if you haven't picked up your copy yet, definitely head to thespecialistfalcon.com and do so. You can also get signed copies from Simon as well on that website. And like I said, it's a must-have. Definitely add it to your bookshelf. All right, and for those of you who are art collectors, particularly wildlife and falconry art collectors, I'm sure you're already very familiar with the name Andrew Ellis. Andy is not only an accomplished falconer, but in my humble opinion, is one of the best wildlife artists in the world. I may just be biased now because I've actually gotten a chance to sit down and talk to him and get to know him a little bit, but I've been a big fan of his work for a long time now, and it's a personal goal of mine to own a painting of his eventually. I really hope I can make that happen sometime down the road, but we'll just have to see. But either way, there was a lot of things that we covered in this conversation that I'm very happy with. I got a chance to talk to him about his evolution as an artist and some of his personal falconry, and hopefully we get to do a part 2 down the road and cover a lot of the things that we wish we would have gotten a chance to discuss but just didn't have the time for. So all that being said, I'm sure you're going to really enjoy this conversation that I had with Andrew Ellis. So have fun, enjoy, and here we go. Mr. Ellis, so how are you, man?
I'm good.
Good?
Happy to be here.
No, well, I'm happy for you to be here. I've seen a lot of your art. We were just talking about that. And
yes.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Thank you.
Don't have any originals yet. I hope to remedy that at some point. Yeah.
I like the yet.
If you wait me out long enough, it'll happen.
That's good to know.
We've got to figure out how to make it happen. We'll talk more about that after this is all done.
Always willing to.
But cheers, man. Cheers. It's good to meet you.
No, I'm grateful to be here, and I've enjoyed listening to some of the podcasts anyway.
Nice.
I've caught up with most of them, but I've still got some to listen to. So
nice.
Yeah, it's great what you're doing. Really, I really think it's a good thing.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the support. You know, I guess, I mean, it's still, I can't speak for Israel, but I'm pretty sure that he feels the same way. It's still kind of humbling and somewhat, I guess, strange to us in a way to have people, you know, come up to us and tell us they enjoy it and stuff. We put the stuff out there because we enjoy doing it and hope people like it, get something out of it. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure do you ever feel that kind of way whenever people give you compliments on your art and stuff? Do you find it hard or weird sometimes to accept like compliments?
I think, I mean, I've been doing the art side of things for so long, you do get used to it. But it's always nice. Of course it's nice because you're putting your creative side out there, which, let's face it, that's part of you, big part of you, and some people feel very vulnerable with that. And to get nice feedback is always welcome. It means that you're doing something that is worthwhile and brings pleasure to people's lives.
Sure. Yeah. It's amazing how Falconers in general, I think, because falconry is partially, an art, or there's a big aspect of it that is an art.
Well, I think it is an art form.
Yeah,
it's developed as an art form.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that we as falconers in general can be a sensitive bunch at times anyway. on a good day.
On a good day.
Yeah.
Okay. Ego gets involved there, I'm afraid, sometimes. And I've seen the worst and the best of it, for sure. But no, because we put so much into it. Just like the art. I mean, you're immersed, in the process. And that immersion is all the way along the line. You can have a hawk that's 10 years old, but it's developing all that time. Even though it's an old timer, it knows the ropes, you're still developing that bird. There's always something new every year that you see, especially, in my experience anyway, you think, this is different. Not done this before. Or, and with the painting, it's the same. It never stops. You're always learning, always developing. And that is such a valuable thing. It really, really is. To pass on to other people, to show other people. And they see it too. I mean, people, comment on it, on the artwork. They say, God, this is even better, or, you're doing this slightly differently. I love the way that you're becoming more loose in this area, or,
Sure.
So, getting feedback, it's a nice thing. It is a nice thing. Especially from people that you respect and know their subject. I mean, that's going back to the beginning of things. When I was learning with my art and thinking that it might be even a possibility to make this a living, I was painting birds almost exclusively, and falcons in particular, birds of prey. And my biggest critic and the best critic were the falconers, and one falconer in particular that was teaching me. His opinion was everything. And so to get that feedback to say, yeah, you nailed that, is brilliant, It
Sure.
really is.
Yeah.
So with the podcast and what we do, it's vital. Yeah.
No, I agree. And it kind of, I'm sure, goes along to some degree with like that positive reinforcement that you get whenever you're learning from your mentor, and learning how to train a bird in the beginning. And as a musician too, I can, I totally understand. It always feels, let's just say, it always feels so much better to be told that you made someone feel good by what you're doing, as opposed to the opposite end of the spectrum, in which, it can get kind of brutal sometimes. But
of course,
you learn, just like in falconry too, though, you learn whenever you're, initially starting off to get some thick skin. It takes a certain degree of thick skin. And
I think that's really important, and that's one thing. When this particular gentleman that I've got in my mind started critiquing my work, he didn't pull his punches sometimes. He said that you could do better than that. That's shite. Just better. But it helped me develop that thick skin to think, no, this is all positive. A lot of people would curl up in a corner and think, oh my God, you've been awful to me, Right. I don't want to do this anymore. But I'm glad I had that because it also helps you self-critique harder, push yourself harder. So when I was developing, it was essential to get that. And I actually took that to college. When I was at college, tutors we'd have these critiques in front of the class, and that can be quite brutal, but it helped me. You got to see through all you don't see it as personal. Don't take it personally. They're trying to produce the best from you, and that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's if you don't learn how to take the criticism and whether it be constructive or otherwise the right way from the get-go, then you're going to have a very hard time in any kind of art type world, in any kind of creative world.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just something that comes with it.
That said, giving out advice and criticism, I do sometimes find hard because I know how, I've had other artists say, what do you think of this? And it is hard sometimes to be brutally honest, because you don't know how they're going to take it. But that's just another facet of it. But, if you're working on your own personal development, then you've got to develop that thick skin.
Yeah.
You've got to take the criticism, analyze it, don't take it all, at face value, but really look into what they're saying, take it on board, and learn from it.
Yeah, and we never stop learning in any creative facet, whether it be falconry or art or any other form of art. Otherwise,
some really good parallels with doing the painting side of things and developing, say, a falcon. I see that from the very beginning. You got a blank canvas. That's the obvious one, And you're thinking, well, how am I going to mold this falcon? How do I want it to turn out? What are my objectives? If those objectives don't quite pan out, what am I going to do? All these things. And that comes with the art too. I've got this idea and I've got to put the foundation work in to make this a masterpiece. It's a lovely process.
Well,
in both regards.
No, I can totally see that. And I mean, how long now have you been doing both?
It's a very good question because, quite honestly, since I can remember, and I don't say that lightly. It's especially with the art. So, my mother has told me that she remembers me at, say, 5, drawing very basic shapes of basically hooks with eyes, which clearly I remember I had this very basic stylized zoo book with animals in it that she was in, amongst the toys and stuff like that, and the children's books that you get. And I remember her telling me that I copied a lot from that. And then I would get her to copy. Can you draw this, Mum? Can you draw that, Mum? And then that developed to me just drawing. But really noticeable as a child, I was obsessed with birds. Just looking out the window, watching the bird feeders. Coincidentally, my father raced pigeons. He was into racing pigeons.
A lot of money can be in that.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, and a lot of his friends were also, big into it. There's a little group of them locally that did a lot with the birds. And obviously, as a small boy, I would be taken along to the club meetings and stuff like this. So birds were around me a lot, and I used to like drawing as much as possible. I remember sitting at my parents' house window. The back window looked out into the garden, and there was always a feeder there. And I remember trying to draw small birds coming to it, house sparrows, blue tits, greenfinches, all these. And even early on, I'm talking sort of at primary school level. My parents told me about this time. My dad came and my mum came to what is like a parents' evening, where they all come and, they look at the kids' work and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then we'd been drawing animals, drawing stuff. And Dad remarked to my mum after that he came away from there and there was all these abstract, daubings, messy paintings with thick brushes. But he said what really stood out is that among them was a budgerigar, and you could tell it was a budgerigar and it was mine. So even as a small infant, primary level, I was already honing. Yeah, I've got to get this right. I was really looking and really, really studying. So it started from very, very early. And then coincidentally, because my dad had all these pigeon books and stuff like that, I remember leafing through one and I came across this image of a peregrine. And I remember asking, I said, "What's that, Dad? What is this bird?" "Oh, yeah, those things." And I was obsessed from that point. I was just looking at this, and it was a black and white engraving type picture of a peregrine.
Gotcha.
And then when he told me, "Oh, these things are super fast, they're faster, they catch pigeons," because I already knew how fast pigeons were. I said, "Wow, these things catch pigeons?" And I was hooked, and I had to find out everything I could about peregrines and birds of prey in general. And that started a whole chapter of, obsession about birds of prey. I'd bug them about, we go on motorway journeys down to my grandparents who lived in Cornwall, and all the way down on the motorway, I'm looking out the window, looking for kestrels hovering on the side of the road. Completely obsessed.
Yeah, that's great. Now, so about what age do you think that you can remember that you kind of had your first actual falconry experience, whether that be going to a meet or actually seeing a hunt or...
Well, I kind of consider that quite late for me. I'd been obsessed with birds of prey, and I used to buy books, and I used to look at the plates and marvel at the artwork that these artists were doing on birds of prey. And I, quite obsessively, in fact, I would rate a guidebook on its plates of birds of prey, whether the guy was good or not. Even at a young age. And I would flick through the book very quickly to the raptors section. That's how obsessed I was with it. So anything on TV or the books, stuff like that. My first falconry experience wasn't until I was probably about 15, 16. And I remember going to what we commonly know now as country fairs, game fairs. And there was one locally that turned up, first one in a long time. I'd never come across it. I used to live down the road from a race course, and it was on at the race course, and there was a falconer there. And I remember just hanging around for ages, just staring at the birds. Couldn't bring up the courage to go and talk to the guys. And that was the Welsh Hawking Club. I didn't realize at the time, but they had a big static. They didn't do any flying displays there, but they had a static display. There was golden eagle there was peregrines, and I was obsessed with. I got my dad's camera from home, and I raced back to the show and was taking these black and white photos of the peregrine almost exclusively. But the year after, the show was on again, and this time they'd got a falconer there that was going to do a flying display, and that guy was called Jeff Pearson. Dad came along with me, and he said, and we took some of my early paintings, and I was too shy. I was too shy to talk to the guy. So Dad came with me and he said, look, I'll get his attention. You just start talking to him. So he got Jeff to come over and he said, look, we'd like you to have a look at this work, see what you think of it. And he was very gracious and could see, obviously, that there was something in these drawings, paintings. And from that point, he said, no, come round. And I saw he invited me around to where, inside the display area, and I got talking to him and his wife, and we arranged then for me to go down to his place, and they ran courses, so it wasn't very long before I was on course and actually living with the idea that I could do this. I could actually become a falconer.
Yeah, so it wasn't that long then after that you actually got to see birds actually really hunting in action.
Yeah. I mean, Jeff primarily was what you would term as a display falconer, although he did hunt, but that was his living, was doing the display work. They had a center which they designed and built at one of the local attractions, and I went there, but I went out hunting with him with Harris hawks and rabbits. So I saw all that, got to handle the birds primarily, but I was also not really, because of school and stuff like that, I wasn't in a position to really go out and get a bird. So any opportunity I had, I would go and visit them and talk to them, show them the artwork. And he was great because he critiqued it. He guided me where I was going wrong, but slowly they were getting better and better and better. And I remember at some point, I think I was around about sort of 19, 20. And I remember going to see him with a load of work, and he said, I can't fault them. And then I knew, and he said, you need to get to other falconers now and show this, because he says that you can sell these. These are good.
Yeah. So did you start then getting any commissions shortly after that
the first commissions were ironically that they weren't the first commissions. I remember my grandparents lived in Newlyn, which is a very small fishing village down in Cornwall, right near towards Land's End. And we used to go down there for summers and spend my summers there. And I remember a guy, and I would come down and show my grandparents what I've been up to, drawing and painting. I remember I did this prairie falcon painting, very early stuff of mine, with pen and ink and paint, because I was still experimenting. But he saw it from behind the bar. He was on the other side of the bar, and he said, do you want to sell that? And at that point, I'd not really sold anything. And I think it sold for something like
$10.
Yeah, it was like 10 pounds, something like that. But for me at the time, and I was only a young kid, I thought, wow, this is great. I didn't really want to sell it, if I'm honest. There's a stage with any art, I think, any artist, where you're producing this work, you're putting a lot into it. Letting go of them is a new thing, And I sold a few like that, and he commissioned me. He said, when you come down here next year, can you do, I can't even remember what it was. It's like, I think he asked for a kingfisher or something like that, because he wasn't into birds of prey, but, Mm-hmm. And that was like the very first commission. Then Jeff and Glow, his partner, commissioned me to do a few paintings of their birds. But Jeff tipped me the wink about the Falconers Fair, the very first Falconers Fair that was in the UK. And that was 1991. Yeah, 1991. And he said, you got to get to this place. You've got to get to this show, and you've got to show your artwork. And I remember my parents and me driving. I remember talking to the organizers at first, and I got onto the phone with one of the guys. I'm trying to remember his name. Very old gentleman who was one of the organizers. And I got talking to him about what I did, what I was trying to do. I told him my age. And he said, tell you what, I'll give you the pitch for free. If you come with your artwork, I'll give you a small pitch, which you can put your tent up on and sell your artwork. He said, but I'll come along and have a look, and maybe I'll buy one of your pieces too. And he ended up commissioning me in the end. But yeah, that first fair, I got the pitch for free. And I turned up there in this with an orange tent that was probably 20 foot at the most. And we slept in it at night and put the artwork up during the day. And I had the artwork all hung on bamboo canes. It was really rustic and basic. My dad did some of the framing for me, but I sold everything. The first year I sold everything I had. And okay, I wasn't charging a lot, maybe 50 quid to 400 pounds, I think was the most expensive piece I had there.
Yeah, they people were coming by and it was like this stuff is a bargain. This is
I think I was told after the event that people were saying, have you seen that kid's stuff down on the end there? You want to go and have a look at it? Which was really nice to hear. It was a real sort, God, these are the guys that I really want to impress because they know their stuff. And if they think it's good, then I'm getting somewhere. I'm doing it right.
Well, and I'm sure that you probably, were there any other artists there at the time too?
Well, again, that leads on to the next stage for me because there were a number of other artists there, including one called Alan Hunt, who was a pretty big deal actually on the wildlife art scene. He was at the time exhibiting a lot in the States. He'd been picked up by one of the big publishers in the States too. He was doing touring around America and exhibiting over here. He came into the tent and I struck up a con. He thought my father was painting them. So he turned to my father and said, did you do these? And my dad said, no, he did. And then he said, oh, wow. Okay. He said, you're not going to be here next year. You're going to come in with us. And they had a big art marquee specifically full of artists. And he said, you got to be in with us. He said, you can't exhibit like this, So he saw the potential in the work, but he just realized
he didn't know.
Not a clue as to how to show them,
Exactly, yeah. He's just like, you obviously don't know what you're doing.
And,
I mean, it was nice of him to protect you like that.
Absolutely, and believe me, I know the art world can be pretty cutthroat place, but he saw something in me that he clearly thought needs to be brought on and developed. And Alan has always remained a very influential person in my life, as far as the artwork and where I've gone with it. And ironically, years and years later, I end up exhibiting with him a lot for the same gallery in London. That was the start. And very quickly, the falconry fairs, coincidentally at that time, were in quite a buoyant period, and they got better and better and better. This fair just grew and grew, and I remember actually it got to the stage where people were queuing to come and see what I'd put up before I'd even had a chance to get them. They were wanting to buy stuff as it was being unwrapped, to put on the wall, and I was selling stuff before it would even really the show had started. It was a great foundation to work that way. It taught me a lot. The Falconers' support in general for me has been throughout my career. They've always been there. They've always supported what I'm doing. I'm very grateful to them, in general.
Yeah, it's not very often someone can say that they kind of found a couple of their early mentors in both avenues of things that they,
No.
it's kind of in the same environment, the same place, same time type of deal.
Yeah.
It's really unique.
But again, Alan was very quick to impress on me that the real people that you have to impress and the toughest of critics are falconers. They really know the subject. They really know the birds. And to sell to them is a very, very tough thing because they know what they're looking at,
Well, and we all know how frugal a lot of falconers can be too.
Yeah, out of necessity, of course. Yeah. They come from all walks of life.
Sure.
And their passion kind of knows no bounds. I've had guys that have just filled their places with artwork that they've bought, not just from me, but from other artists, just raptor art everywhere. And I can appreciate it because, falconry gets under your skin. Mm-hmm. And some would say, yes, it's in your blood. I don't know about that, but there is something about falconry that is quite intoxicating.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can manage your way through the initial hoops that you have to jump through and you're not deterred and you keep with it and in a lot more of a steady way and don't fall by the wayside with it, then it's very hard to give it up once once it's ingrained and established.
It is. And this is where your mentors are really important, I admire kind of the system that you have in the States with the mentorship that you have. And we don't have that. And I have always admired it. We have it in a much more informal way.
Yeah.
And if you can find a gem of a falconer that really knows his thing, you can learn so much. It can lift your falconry very quickly in direction and ability, just like art. If you can find the right mentor with art, it lifts your ability. You have to have that innate ability, of course. I don't believe that people have a God-given gift. I think it needs to be worked out. And I remember working really hard on my drawing in particular. And I look back at the drawings now and I think, oh my God, it's horrendous. But I remember the blood, sweat and tears of drawing, copying. And I did a lot of copying. I looked at artists like George Lodge, of course. David Reed Henry was a real influence to me. And then I started to discover more contemporary artists like Robert Bateman and the likes of Alan Hunt. And it hones what you do. But it's just blood, sweat, tears, working on it constantly.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, no, I do know. Yeah, I mean, I used to lock myself in my room for anywhere from 2 to 5 hours. I know that's a kind of a broad spectrum there, but I mean, depending on, home workload or if I had to work or whatever, 2 to 5 hours a night, starting from my late freshman year of high school all the way through pretty much practicing, like when I started playing bass a lot more heavily and so I get it. And I mean, even I still listen back occasionally to mixes or things I mixed or mastered from, 10, 15 years ago and exactly the same thing. I just, think I'm going to lose either my sense of hearing or I've given my ears cancer or something. I'm wanting to just vomit.
No, I know that
listening.
feeling.
I
know that feeling.
It's
finding
terrible.
the early work is horrendous sometimes.
Well, I mean, even these podcasts and since I've started doing this, I mean, there's still things that there's things that I do now that are different than even when I started doing this, 4 years ago.
Yeah, of course.
And there's just little things that you pick up, and your other audio buddies that you talk to occasionally are like, oh, I'm using this plugin to do this now, and it really clean. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll give it a try. And then now I'm using it every single time now. I mean, it's just part of my routine now. So it's.
I mean, Alan, for one, I had a big leap of development from Alan because I was looking at his paintings and thinking, what is he painting on? This isn't like I used to use illustration board, which is quite loose and flimsy, really, although it's harder than... I progressed from trying to work on stretch paper and work that all out, and I was thinking, what are these guys painting on? And it was masonite, basically. What we call MDF. And he showed me how to prepare the board, how to make the surface right. I asked him what paints he was using, and once I discovered the paints that he was using, which was acrylics, my work stepped up a massive level from that point, It's almost like early on I was battling against all this, the materials I was using were never going to give me the results that I was looking at that they were producing,
Oh, yeah.
So just knowing the technical side of it, being educated about the technical side of materials, it lifts you, and you can just progress that much more. The same thing's true of falconry. I think once somebody sort of shows you what is possible with maybe a certain bird as well, I mean, for Jeff's support and teaching, he was at a certain level of falconry, and I always wanted. I was a peregrine nut. I was going to want to fly peregrines, and that was a dream. And he, because of where we lived in Devon, which is largely enclosed country, he always said to me, "Nah, you don't want to go and fly a peregrine. You're just going to lose it. You just, a few years down the line, I'm flying peregrines in Devon, on game and having success because I started talking to people that knew how to get to that point,
Mm-hmm.
and it just shows you can move forward with it, and you just have to keep progressing.
So how long did it take you to get that first peregrine? Then did you start with a different bird or?
Well, because I had an unconventional, I would say, start with it because I was spending so much time with Jeff and Glow, and at the center later on that they had, I was handling the birds. I was handling I was handling Harrises, owls, small falcons, even large falcons, helping them out. So when it came to the point, which was quite late for me, of getting a falcon, and I would say I'm trying to remember, it was probably about 21. He said to me, "You don't need to get a Harris, because all you're going to do is have the Harris, you're going to hunt it for a bit, and then you're going to want to progress onto a long wing." So he said, just start with a lanner. Get a female lanner and, just start with her. And that's what I did. And I was very lucky. After the Falconry Fair, I started meeting falconers that really knew what they were doing. And in 92, I remember my first trip to Scotland, and I got to see grouse hawking for real, which blew me away. Absolutely blew me away. And I thought, this is what I want to do. This is what I want, but it was all dreamland still, it was just amazing. So I went up to Forsenard and I saw some of the best falconers in the country at that time flying peregrines. Steve Williams, Paul Gillett was flying. There was an American guy, actually, David Frank. He was flying, and David actually was very helpful to me, I have to say, through my early career. He was very helpful. He was the one who actually said at the fair, come up to Scotland. I'll get you to come up. And that's when I went up on his invite, and I got to meet these guys. Getting back to the Lanner thing, Paul Gillett had a friend, Gary Margetts, who's sadly passed now, but a great guy. He had bred this one Lanner that was total imprint, but he tame hacked it from his place. Absolutely lovely bird. And he said, she'd be perfect for you. You know, just learn with this one. And so I took on that bird, total imprint, female Lanner called Zoe. And I cut my teeth with her. I kept her for, I think, about 4 or 5 seasons. And I ended up actually even hunting with her, which I never thought I would do. I thought it would be lure flying and, you know, and then I ended up hedge bashing with her, you know, just in a very basic, random way. Put her up and then bash hedges for stuff to come out. It was fun, a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. And we caught stuff. You know, I caught partridge with her. I caught moorhen. I caught wood pigeons. I caught, you know, starlings, these sorts of things, blackbirds. But then in the end, again, because of my novice sort of status in a way, imprints for me were a complete mystery. And I'd read up and I'd read this and that, and I worked out, I kept her aggression down. She was never vocal. She never became, you know, a vocal bird, but her aggression did start to come out towards me when she started to mature. And I remember talking to a breeder friend of mine by then who'd become a collector of my work. And he said, why don't I take Zoe from you? You know, she'd be good for breeding. She's a total imprint. And I'll give you a bird to fly. And that's when I went to a small male Barbary called Dink. He was 14 ounces. Probably in hindsight may not have been the best choice for me, but I learned. And then I progressed from him onto larger peregrines and went down that road, really, to flying peregrines at game, you know. And I've had a number of them, and I'll always be a peregrine nut. It's just in me now. I just don't, you know, I've flown a few hybrids, but I've always returned to peregrines.
Yeah, so as far as any of the other, I know we were kind of talking back and forth between, but before we started, between the time that you got here and before we started recording, that didn't you say you'd flown like some Merlins or something too?
Yeah, I've only had one Merlin, which I flew, and that was a Jack Merlin. And I had some success with him. I don't think I was doing brilliantly with him, but he caught larks, you know, and he caught a lot of pipits. He wasn't doing any of the real classical ringing flights, but I had a lot of fun with him. And what happened there was, if I remember correctly, I was flying the Merlin, and then another good friend of mine, Leonard Hurrell, who's one of the old guard of falconry here. Leonard's a very dear old chap from Plymouth. He's one of the first men to breed. I think he was the first guy to breed sparrowhawks in captivity here. So he had peregrines, but he was also one of the front lines of people having birds brought into him that were in trouble, you know, rehab stuff. And I'd been flying this Merlin for a while, and I was thinking along the lines of what shall I get next, sort of thing, you know. I was going to carry on flying him, but I then passed him on to another friend because Leonard had come into with this tiercel that was handed in with very, very bad worm infestation. He was just very, very low, but he was essentially a passage tiercel peregrine. Leonard got him flying, and flew him to a certain point, but Leonard had no game. And I was lucky enough to be on land with game. And Leonard said to me, do you want to take this tiercel on? But the proviso with this particular tiercel was that he was for release. So we had to get him fit, killing, hunting, and it was going to take basically a season after his first molt to get him up and ready where we'd be satisfied that he could go back. So I had a season flying this second year passage, basically. And he was awesome. He's one of the best tiercels I ever flew.
Well, that's a wide variety of experience. Like I said, that was over. So that was from roughly, you said 21, 22 years old till now, pretty much.
Yeah, I've had a number of female peregrines. Not many, like a couple, and the rest have been tiercels. Mostly flying at partridge, which, like Simon has also said, we're in a situation in England a lot where wild partridge are very sort of localized, if you like. And where I managed to find large fields towards the coast which suited flying game, and I had a small release program, and there was a bunch of us at that time, sort of my early 20s. Dave Scott, another artist, actually, artist Falconer friend, was just up the road, and we all seemed to get into long wings around the same time. So he was flying Perry Sakers, and I was flying. I had a female peregrine Barbary, actually, but she was on the larger side for that hybrid. But and I flew her at partridges, but it all started with this rehab tiercel, really, in real, actually succeeding flying a lot of quarry and having a lot of fun. I used to fly him at all sorts. I flew him at teal, snipe, golden plover, which, is in my mind, one of the ultimate quarries. If you can get your falcons regularly taking golden plover, you're up there, really. I had flights of them. I wasn't particularly successful at them, but I had a lot of very exciting flights on golden plover with that boy. So it was a period of a lot of enthusiasm and mistakes and learning about kites. Suddenly this new technique had come in of using kites to get pitch, and so I started messing around with that, and then later on came the drones. As you know, it's always progressing, always evolving.
Sure.
And you're learning. But one of my best female peregrines actually came through Dave's hands. Again, he was on the rehab side of things, and she was called Megan, and she was a pure British peregrine, large, dark. I couldn't believe when he opened the box and said, I want you to work with this. And he opened the box, this beautiful dark female peregrine staring at me and spitting fire and venom, and you know what they're like. And I worked with that bird. She was really smashed up. She'd flown. She was being watched by a group of enthusiasts, as we say, that regularly watch certain peregrine sites. She'd flown into the roof space of one of these cathedrals where they got anti-pigeon netting. So she got wrapped up in all this anti-pigeon netting and smashed herself to pieces trying to break through. So she'd had broken primaries and tail and everything. She was a mess. So the only option with her was to imp into her massively and fly her to the kite to build her fitness. And I knew I'd have to molt her out before I even then decided what we're going to do with her. So that's what I did. I kited her for a year, just solid, Another friend of mine did all the imping for me, and we kept her in the air despite her damage, and I had that bird for 5 seasons in the end, and she became one of the best peregrines I've ever had.
Would you say so, yeah, I mean, you've listened to the podcast enough that that we always want at least a good story or two about a particular bird or a particular hunt or whatnot.
Yeah.
But I mean, would you classify that as your best then, or is there another bird that's still like at the forefront of your mind for a particular
really
hunt?
Tough, really tough. I think she was the best female peregrine that I'm ever likely to fly. She was, she wasn't the largest, she wasn't the most powerful, but she certainly loved to fly. And she became a very high mountain bird. With the way my life went, sadly I got divorced about sort of 11 years ago. But I had Megan at the time, and I had the opportunity put in front of me through an art collector to move up to Northumberland onto a grouse moor. And he gave me the opportunity to fly peregrines at grouse. So I had Megan, who was already 3 seasons or so old, and then I started grouse hawking with her. She was awesome, absolutely awesome. She made that transition from flying pheasants and partridge straight onto grouse, no problem at all. Took to it really easily. But my most memorable flight with her was on a pheasant, a hill pheasant, which they're really tough birds, because I'd imagine obviously in hill country in America, pheasants are really hard to get to lock to a point, aren't they? They run around in cover. And I had this point and I thought it was a grouse. And it was on this side of a hill overlooking near a big reservoir, big body of water. And my pointer, which was also given to me at the time, Amber, had been struggling to locate this point. She was coming on, coming off. And I thought, these grouse are giving her the runaround, But Megan was already at sort of, and this was pre-GPS, I'd have no idea really, but she was a good sort of 600 feet and climbing. And I was thinking, this is going to be good. This is going to be nice. And then because Amber was struggling to lock onto this, whatever it was, grouse, pheasant, I didn't know, but I thought it was grouse. The next time I looked at it, I couldn't see Megan. I just, at that point where you just like, I just cannot see where this falcon is. And my only indication was faith, really, that she was still there. And I turned on the telemetry and got a rough idea about where she was. Anyway, I nearly stood on this cock rooster, and they're small up in Northumberland. They're not big pheasants, but they're like rockets. And this thing took off and headed towards the reservoir. And my memory of her was I couldn't see her from the first part of the stoop, but it looked like she was stooping almost at something else. She was coming down vertically at a distance, and then she bottomed out the stoop and shot past me over my left shoulder at God knows what speed, and just connected to the rooster before he hit the reeds by the edge of this reservoir. And it was that was the flight of her career for me. And he was stone dead in the stoop. She hit him and he dropped like a brick. He was done. And I also had flights on her at black grouse, which is quite unusual. Not many people get to fly that species in this country. And she never brought one to bag, sadly, but she did take feathers out of a few. And, they were always from very high pitches, and it was awesome. She was an awesome bird.
Well, that sounds amazing. It does. I've been fortunate enough actually the first time that I got to see any peregrines connect with ducks or any actual game was when I went to Mexico earlier this year.
Yes.
And I've seen, like when I was training that prairie a handful of years ago, and I've seen some of these other birds train or get, serve pigeons and whatnot, but it's nowhere near as, the speed or the just the stoop that you get or you see in person whenever you see one on live game in the real, I mean, I was amazed how quick, because it was similar situation with this one peregrine, just basically doing the same, actually left side mine also, just kind of come over the top of this pond and just do the side swipe deal, with the duck and
cutting it over.
No, I mean, it's a life goal of mine. I'm not sure if I'll ever live in a place that'll let me do it on any consistent basis, but I'm jealous. I
hope you get to do it, because it's, I mean, again, the connection with the artwork, this is where it all comes together, because you're seeing that firsthand. And then whether I've got an ability to put that on canvas and understand it in a certain way, but that seeing this happen and molding that behavior, seeing it develop in your own falcon day in, day out, I think gives me as an artist a unique perspective on how to put that together in a painting.
It's very admirable, because I can barely draw stick figures. Like, seriously. I mean, I joked with Simon. I was just like, to go with this pile of artwork in the corner of your living room that you've accumulated since I've been here just this 1 week, I'm going to get a piece of paper and just draw you a stick figure falconer or something, just so you can put it above, like in between all your Ellis paintings and everything else. So you just put it right in the middle, just right there. And
I've got a friend, John Mees, who's very, very proud of a eagle that I drew for him on a napkin at a Spanish field meet we both attended. We were both giving talks at this Spanish event, and he's proudly got it up on the wall. This little tiny napkin with a drawing of an eagle head. He sort of dared. He said, "Look, I bet you couldn't just do it just like that."
He knew what he was doing.
He knew what he was doing, of course. But he's very proud of it, and that's great. It's funny. It's and whenever I visit him, I chuckle about it, really, when I see that thing on the wall. But the cutting over thing that you were talking about earlier, I had one, one of my other really, really good flights was with a falcon called Missy, who, she tested me. She was she was my first female peregrine, and female peregrines to me are almost like a different species to the tearsals, in the way that you develop them, the way that they are. They know they can do amazing things, but they're going to make you work. They're going to make you work to produce it, But in our third season, I remember I was going to a BFC local, like, kind of meet, but it was all business. It wasn't field meet. It was like, regular meeting. And it was in the morning, and I got up at first light to go out and scout for a flight before the meeting, to then drive up to the meeting. And I remember I found a pheasant in a absolutely sweet setup in the middle of nowhere, just off the side of a track. I used to put feeders out, and I also used to broadcast feed as well. So I would, put loads of grain up and down the track. And I found a couple of hen pheasants right out in the middle of nowhere, and I had them in the bins, and I thought, this is just perfect. It doesn't get any better than this. And so I drove down around where I couldn't be seen, and I put Missy up, and she literally just floated around my head at 50 feet. And I'm looking at this sweet setup, and begrudgingly and rather annoyed and spitting feathers, I called her in and said, right, you're going to pay for that in a way. I'm just going to stick you back in the car. You're not going to get fed. I'm going to go to the meeting. I had the meeting, and it was all day long, and I came back and I thought, I wonder if
they're still there.
I wonder if they're still there in the area. And it was at the time of day where, I'm losing light. And so it's not really on my way home, but I take the detour. I'm thinking, I've got to do this. I've got to see. And I get there, and sure enough, there's one single hen pheasant just outside the bit of cover that runs along the track. And I thought, well, it's now or never. And I got her ready, kitted her up, cast her off. And like clockwork, she was ping, 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 mounting above me. And I start the long walk out. Magic time of day as well. Both first light for me and end of the day, magic times. It was still, maybe a little light wind, crisp still. It was quite cold. Not a cloud in the sky, but the sun's going down, and she's making these lovely circuits above me, and the sun's lighting up her breast every time she'd make that turn, And I'm trying not to look up too much because I don't like doing that, all the time. And I get to within sort of 20 yards. And all this time, I mean, I never had a dog for a long time. So I'm sort of thinking, shit, I hope it's there. Shit, I hope it's there. And sure enough, clockwork, this hen pheasant erupts and heads for cover, which is a good sort of 200-300 yards to go. It's got a long way to go. And I look up and she's rolled over and she's coming down, steaming down. And again, she did this thing where she swung out to the right and came right the way across the front of the pheasant. And it was almost as if she barely touched it, but it just crumpled and just crumpled to the floor. And she did this lovely sort of, oh yeah, I'll just get to it in a minute. This sort of curling up around, and she just winnowed down. It was stone dead. And I was just thinking, Jesus, what a transformation from this morning where she just couldn't be asked to, having to go hungry for all that time. But boy, was she businesslike when I took her out again. But that was a hell of a flight for me. Yeah. Absolutely amazing.
Heard of similar experiences from a lot of other long wingers. Yeah. And especially the ones that are like, oh, I don't serve my bird if it's under 800 feet or whatever, blah, blah. Yep. I'll just call them back down. And then the next time they'll go up where I want them. I'm like, okay, I'll just take your word for it, whatever, and I'm like, it would be awful hard for me not to go ahead and serve that if it was a perfect slip or whatever. But anyway, well, yeah, no, that's beautiful, man.
You do learn.
Yeah.
And it took me, I've always had a problem with the discipline of it.
Yeah.
It's hard, when you've got that, even if the bird is sort of good, sort of 400 feet and it's looking really good, if that's not what it's usually done or it's lower, and it's really hard to think, no, you're coming down to the lure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It would be awful tough, I'm sure. Yeah,
it is.
And I've heard that you have to do it though, because otherwise they won't ever go above that ever again if you do serve them and stuff.
I mean, it took me a good, most falcons take about 3 or 4 seasons to really get, you get TSLs sometimes develop a lot quicker. Mm-hmm. They seem to have that natural mounting ability, but females can be tough. But I am very lucky that I had the two end up being quite high flyers, but it was hard work. I had friends that were flying hybrids. Dave Scott's Perry Saker was regularly an absolute speck in the sky, and she did it almost from the word go. A complete natural, beautiful, beautiful falcon, really, really good bird. And I marveled at it. But again, peregrines I found not so easy, but they will do it, and they do it well.
Yeah. No, that's awesome, man. No, I think that's like I said, it's been a great conversation. I think we probably need to go ahead and end on the usual note of going ahead and seeing if you've got anything to pass on, words of wisdom or otherwise, to anyone getting into it or other generations. Or
well, what I'm going to do is I'll say it's a long journey. And I think people, they want to rush to the best bit first. They're just desperate to get to these points of. And the one thing that I've learned is that it is a slow process. And be patient. Be patient. Both be patient with you and be patient with the birds. some will be naturals and they will progress very quickly. And if you've got one of those gems, then, well, congratulations to you, you know. But often they're not, and you have to iron out all these kinks but be patient with them. But the other thing is, maybe I should say something about these guys that want to paint.
Yeah.
Get into the raptor side of things. And I have bird artists, falconry artists regularly, you know, saying to me any advice and stuff like that. But the biggest thing I can say is make sure your drawing is on point. And that's where it all begins, because that's the scaffold that you build the whole thing on. And if your scaffold is off by even a little way later on down the line in the process of doing the painting, it shouts out. So just draw, and do more drawing, and then do more drawing again until you are nailing stuff, you know. Also, try and get your own reference. Build your reference library up for yourself. Get out there in the field, video, photograph, do all these things, you know. But drawing is really, really important.
Perfect. I'll take your word for it. Because I mean, you're kind of all right at what you do, I guess. You know,
I'm trying.
So you know, I'll
getting
take
there.
Yeah, I'll take your word for it. Like I said, I can't draw anything past stick figures, but yeah, man. No, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to stop off, and
no problem.
And we won't
thank you.
We won't bore anyone else right now that may or may not be in the room with us, kind of listening. We'll
he's heard it 30 times before.
I'm sure. But yeah, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
No, this was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers now. Bye bye.